Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger, and here to help people scared of various things, and especially those connected with our group, Facebook group, Doomsday Debunked. And this time it's about the North Korea, the activity, which is scaring some people. They've done a second engine test, and there's nothing here to worry about. It's not going to harm you personally. They've done an engine test at the launch pad of the Sohae satellite launch facility. It's a second engine test. And this has only been used for launching satellites. And although they say that this engine could be used for a ballistic missile, I think it's very unlikely myself, my personal view, that they're going to use it for that. It makes far more sense. They're going to use it for their geostationary satellite, which they've wanted to do since 2017. It was one of the big things that he said in his 2017 speech, that that's what their scientists had developed, the way to launch a geostationary satellite, which would be quite impressive, because it's much harder than to lower orbit. But if it is a missile test, then again, it's not something to worry about. They are not going to try to hit the United States. That would be very, very silly. And they aren't silly. They're extremely canny, that's a Scottish word, but they're very careful and they work things out, and they're very quick in their understanding of how to respond to things. And that's not to say they're ruthless, of course, in their human rights issues, but they are not stupid. And the United States has also done a test recently, and this is absolutely normal again for the United States. They launch their ballistic missiles frequently because they need to make sure that they're still working properly and calibrate them and check them. And of course, they can easily they have these intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they just fired one for several thousand miles, and it may have been partly, the timing might have been partly just to show to North Korea as a reminder. Of course, they know already that the United States can do these things. It's I also did a medium range one, which is the one that used to be banned but isn't anymore because the US and Russia withdrew from this arms treaty. This is one that is okay to fire from submarines, but until recently they couldn't fire it from the land. Now they can. And this is not really relevant to Europe. They're not likely to put this into Europe, but they might put it somewhere near to North Korea. It's possible. So the very worst would happen is that North Korea goes back to what it did before in 2017. I do not think this is likely, because they've only got 1 year left of Trump's first term, and for them it's a golden opportunity to get some kind of a peace deal, which will be very difficult with other presidents, because it's normally very hard for North Korea to arrange a meeting with the President of the United States. And Trump has been the only president they have been able to meet up with. And I don't know, they will be wondering, will any future president, if he is not re-elected, or if he gets impeached, would Pence arrange meetings to talk with them? There's no guarantee he would. And there's no guarantee that any future president would. And this seems to be the key that led to the breakthrough with Trump, because for them it is very important. They are a Confucian society, and they work from the top. And it's very important for the leader to be able to talk to other leaders. It's not easy for the underlings to negotiate these treaties and agreements. So they very much want this to happen now, before Trump is out of office, whenever that is. Of course, he may well be re-elected in 2020, but they don't know that for a certainty. And this was the test they did in 2017, and this was widely reported, but it wasn't often reported very accurately, because it's not likely that this warhead, they fired a warhead just straight up into the air, and then it went up very high, and then it fell back down again, quite close to where it was launched from. And that is because they just want to show that they can send it very, very high. And then from how high it went, the United States could calibrate that this meant it would be able to target the United States if it wanted to. And that's all they're likely to do this time. They will not want to send it anywhere near the United States. They won't want to cause any problems of that sort. They will just fire it high up into the air and say to the United States, look, we fired this way up in the sky, and this shows we could hit you if we fired it at an angle rather than almost vertically. So that's all that they're threatening to do is the very worst case. But I don't think it's likely they will do that. And this one that they did in 2017, then it was, the experts don't think that they actually fired a real rocket, a real warhead up that height, because they're very heavy. This is, they can actually be very light. So this is a very light knapsack type nuclear weapon that the United States developed. It doesn't have it anymore. They even had one so small they could be fired as artillery shells. So nuclear bombs can be very, very small indeed. But that is extremely advanced technology. It's 1970s technology for the United States. But it requires lots and lots of tests and advances and breakthroughs which are totally secret. And North Korea would not be able to make this. And it's a little bit dubious whether this is actually a real nuclear weapon or whether it's a mock-up. But this sort of thing would be far too heavy to send on the ballistic missile that they sent, if it is, as they think, just a minor modification of a previous one. And then the other problem is that when you fire a rocket like that, this is, I think, the launch, but it also does re-entry, and it all burns up during re-entry if you don't have very high technology. And it's thought that all the North Korean ballistic missiles, the very long-range ones, just burn up on re-entry. It's much, much faster re-entry than for the shorter range ones that it does all the time. That also goes above the atmosphere and down again, but this goes much higher above the atmosphere. It's much faster. It reaches, I think, 1,000 degrees or something temperature on the re-entry, and far well above the melting point of metals. And it is very challenging to make this thing so that it's going to re-enter without it just burning up completely in the atmosphere. They have aero shields and things like that to kind of deal with it, or very, very high temperature and very, very high temperature materials. And then you actually, I think with a ballistic missile, you have to have an aero shield, just like you do with re-entry from the moon or re-entry from the ISS. So you have this material that burns off as it re-enters the atmosphere in order to protect the missile itself. And it's not thought that North Korea has achieved this yet. And that for a ballistic missile and all the details that it needs to make it work. And the experts back in 2017, and I don't think anything has changed since then, they thought that North Korea was probably still about a year away from developing the capability to really target the United States with a nuclear weapon. So it couldn't do it, even if it wanted to. It certainly didn't have the ability back then. And it's likely you need to actually do the tests. You can't do it just in the laboratory. And so it seems that it just would have to do quite a few more tests before it really seriously could hit the United States. And it's absolute nonsense. North Korea has issued some kind of fighting statement saying we can obliterate I can't remember the actual words they used, obliterate the threat from the United States military. That's obvious nonsense. even Russia couldn't do that, if it wanted to, which nobody can. And so there's no way that the North Korea with a nuclear with one or two nuclear weapons could do anything to the might of the US military and make it impossible for them to retaliate. That's absolutely daft idea. So you don't need to worry that North Korea has any ideas like that. And they certainly don't want to provoke the United States. That's sort of like tickling the nose of a polar bear close up. They're not going to do that. So they just want to show that they've got these weapons, and that if they're attacked, then they've got a deterrent. That is their aim, or that they could develop a deterrent. And then, actually, far more likely that their aim just now would be to say to the United States, look, we've got this satellite launch station, and we promised that we would dismantle it, and we did, as a condition, as our part of the talks, which they did. And then they said, but you haven't kept up your side of the bargain, of continuing to talk to us and kind of to make progress. So we have rebuilt this thing that we promised to destroy, and then if they were to actually launch a satellite from it, then that would be even more striking, and this would be like a big counter that they can bring to the talks, and they can say to the United States, we are prepared to come back and talk, and we are prepared as a goodwill thing to demolish this, but this time, because you didn't give us anything back, except just stopping the exercises with North Korea, we need something back from you before we demolish this again. And then we want more back for the future stages. So it would be really like a kind of big bargaining counter is their most likely reason for wanting to do anything here. And I find it very unlikely that they actually would want to do a intercontinental ballistic missile test. It's very credible that they would want to threaten to do that, but to actually do that would make things rather awkward for Trump, and they don't want to delay the possibility of having summit meetings with him. And even though they got this year-end deadline, then they're masters of this sort of thing. And I'm sure if the United States comes back and says, okay, we can do it, we can meet you in January or something, then they're not going to throw that up. And there are talks going on, and this is kind of like them, what they're saying publicly, and embarrassing the United States and trying to get them to talk to them. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes and what they're saying privately. So anyway, just don't worry. A lot of you are getting very scared and are afraid that North Korea wants to attack the United States. There's absolutely no way that it wants to do that. And there's no way that the United States wants to attack North Korea, because there's just too much consequence. If the United States attacked North Korea, then it would attack Seoul, and then that would be absolutely awful for lots of civilians and for including lots of tourists and United States civilians in South Korea. This is not going to happen. And that is the very worst case, the worst case. And I don't expect this to happen, and I don't see this happening next year either, because it's so important for them to try and get meetings with Trump. The very worst case is they go back to 2017 and they cut off communications with South Korea. That's again not very likely, because they've made a lot of progress talking more to South Korea, and they are their ally, and in a way they are the intermediary between them and the United States, and President Moon is helping them to talk to the United States and kind of helping behind the scenes to find common ground. And but anyway, the worst case is that they start They went all the way back to 2017, and then they've become an independent nuclear power, and this is their deterrent, their permanent deterrent. That is the absolutely worst case. And they become like Pakistan. They're just another nation, of course, much more secretive and with human rights obligations and issues and so on. But this is not likely because the North Korea has so much to gain from a peace deal of some sort, and from the economic incentive. South Korea want to pour billions of dollars into North Korea to help bring the country up to speed. The North Korean people are very poor. Most of them can't afford a car, and they just have bicycles. They have big problems with fuel. They just don't have fuel to run all their power stations. They often have power cuts at night. Only the main capital, Pyongyang, really has a decent supply of power at night, and even there they have glitches. They often have problems with food security. They have had famines. They have medicine issues. They are a third world country, a least developed country in many ways. They are actually more healthy than other least developed countries at their income level, at their GDP level. But they have lost so much from their isolation and from the sanctions, and they could have been like South Korea and like Japan, a wealthy country. And instead, many of the North Koreans, they just can't get the drugs. They haven't got the medicine for them. They are sick of illnesses, many of them that are easily treatable, and like parasitic worms. North Korean defectors have like 11-inch parasitic worms in their stomachs that they just haven't been able. And this here we're talking about soldiers who would you surely get a fair bit of the medicine that's available. It is just they really are suffering quite a lot, and personally I think that the level of sanctions that they have at the moment, I don't think that's ethically defensible myself. I think there are too many humanitarian issues, and that they shouldn't have used such severe sanctions. But anyway, these sanctions are very severe. They're impacting hugely on North Korea, and North Korea very much wants an end to them. And they also have huge positive potential. So I'm not saying that's all because of the sanctions, but the sanctions don't help at all. And about the only thing that North Korea can now earn in foreign legally is through tourism, and that's part of the reason why North Korea is expanding its tourist resorts and trying to attract international tourism to its ski resorts and things, because that is an exemption from the sanctions. But it's not, the sanctions are not permitted to cover tourism. So they're going full steam on tourist resorts and trying to attract people from outside. Anyway, so hopefully this helps you a little bit to just be a little bit less scared of North Korea. They have huge human rights issues, but the people in charge, their Confucian, they do care for their country, although they don't. When it comes to individuals who step out of line, then they do deal with them very harshly in ways that violate human rights. But their ideology does include supporting the people, and they actually do have better support than some least developed countries with similar levels of income. But ideologically, of course, they're very constrained, and the people inside North Korea, they can't even see the internet outside of North Korea. And with Trump, it was the first photograph ever probably that they had of a living human, living US president, And a couple of reasons why I think they are genuine about this treaty, this wanting to have a peace deal, is because they used honorifics when describing Trump. And that was a huge, huge change in the way that they see things in North Korea. And that is on the state television which everyone watched. Then they had lots of photographs of Trump and Kim talking to each other. And instead of depicting the president as kind of a monster, they used the honorific, which in a Confucian society like that is a very significant thing to do. Say that he's someone to be honoured. And so I don't think they would do that if they weren't genuine about wanting to make progress in the talks. And sadly things seem to have stepped back a bit, but they still respect Trump. And if you notice these attacks that they make, they don't do personal attacks of Trump very much, although recently we have had this one of a column dotard, which is kind of taunting kind of attack. But I think they do still have some mutual respect, and there is this possibility of these peace deals still going on. And I think that after the New Year's Day and deadline passes, if they haven't yet had a peace talk, I think they will still have ways that they can come back to the table after that. So anyway, we'll see what happens, but there's nothing to worry personally. As the worst case is, as I said, but I don't see it's very likely in the next year that we roll back to 2017, where North Korea was constantly launching every few months. It would launch, not from this place. It didn't launch any missiles from here, but it launched its missiles from other places, right up into the air and way above the atmosphere, and then it came down into the sea. And that is the worst that we can see. But I don't see that very likely. I don't think they would have used this place if they were planning a missile launch. I think just from the choice of the site, it seems far more likely that they're planning a satellite launch. Because why use a satellite launch facility if you planned a military missile launch? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Anyway, and we'll see what happens. And also people worry about, is it when they say a Christmas present, do they really mean launching on Christmas Day? And maybe, but it seems more likely that they mean launching on New Year's Day. Christmas Day doesn't mean anything to North Koreans, and they did have the deadline of New Year's Day. If they did launch on Christmas Day, it would only be because they know it means something to the United States. I suppose it's possible they could launch a satellite on Christmas Day, but I'd have thought more likely New Year's Day. Anyway, we will see. But it's nothing to worry about, nothing personal to worry about. And it's not, and they can't. They make these threats that they're going to kind of demolish the United States military or whatever they said. But this is just words, just fighting words. They can't mount World War III by themselves, and this is not their aim. They have no wish to invade anywhere else. Even with South Korea, their aim is peaceful reunification. Anyway, I've talked about all that in previous videos. I want to keep this one short, and hopefully this helps some of you that have been talking to me and got scared by the recent developments.